And welcome back to the Standard Fantasy Football Podcast. Thanks for tuning in today. We're talking about quarterbacks and tight end rankings. A little sneak peek at who the top 5 of each of ours are and why we like them where they're at. Again, we will be dropping in August our full-on rankings for everybody to have get ready for your fantasy football drafts out there. Before we get into it, don't forget to like and subscribe and click that notification button to get all the alerts when we drop our new episodes. So let's get into it. Our number one quarterback is unanimous amongst, I think, everybody out there, and that's Pat Mahomes.
Shocker.
It's hard to not be when you just consistently do what you do as a professional in your game. There's been no undulating performances from him at all. He has consistently put up massive numbers. I'd say there's one season where he played 14 games where he only had 26 touchdowns. But again, was still Offensive Player of the Year, I believe, that year. So you look at look what he does when you put up over 4,000 yards minimum in your career. Already have a 5,000 yard under your belt, a 50-yard touchdown, or 50 touchdown under your belt, and last year puts up 41 to win the MVP. So that being said, when you take all of that out under the books, he was not Offensive Player of the Year. He was actually 4th for Offensive Player of the Year that year. Sorry, I'm looking at the wrong stat here.
Slow your roll.
Yeah, slow my roll. Pat Mahomes is going to give you at least 42 to 4,800 yards consistently in a season. And on top of that, he's going to get you touchdowns in the 30s. And it's tough to say that for every single quarterback. I mean, you look at Justin Herbert, who last year threw for over 4,700 yards, only had 25 touchdowns. Tom Brady threw for over 4,600 yards last year, only 25 touchdowns. Aaron Rodgers last year had a quote-unquote off-season, threw in the 20s himself. But Pat Mahomes, besides that injured year where he only played 14 games and didn't play the whole season, he has been in the 30s, upwards of 50, and last year in the 40s. I expect him to be in the 40s again this year. His game changed last year after Tyreek Hill left, and everybody was thinking, his touchdowns may go down, the yardage may go down, just because the sheer fact that he's not going to have these big bomb plays and these home run plays like he used to. The dude threw for the most yardage he's ever thrown for in a season, and he threw for 41 touchdowns. All doing that with a scrapbook of wide receivers and the number one tight end in fantasy football and arguably in the NFL. So that being said, I don't see anything different.
Not arguably.
Yeah. There's no big difference from last year to this year that's going to have me say, departure of Juju Smith-Schuster is going to tank his production and his output. In fact, they get people like Richie James, who was one of the best reception percentage leaders last year in the NFL. He's going to get he's got a rookie out there coming in, Rashee Rice. That's going to be a big body. He's still got development Sky Moore, exactly. And they re-signed Jerick McKinnon, who was a monster for him in the receiving game. So I just think at the end of the day, he's got just as many weapons last year as he does this year. And he's going to find himself getting close to 5,000 yards again. And I wouldn't be surprised if he goes over 40 touchdowns.
Yeah, I don't think weapons are the problem there. Like, I don't think – I agree with you. Like, he's consensus number one quarterback, and he's going to be again this season. I don't think weapons have been the problem there. Like, I don't care that he loses Tyreek Hill. I don't even care when if Kels decides to retire, I don't care. Like, he makes players around him better. Yeah. And doesn't matter. And the weapons that they have, like, they're not – like Kadarius Toney, MVS, Juju last year, they're all good players. They're not elite, but they're all good players. And he can get great performances out of good players. And that's what kind of player Mahomes is. What I think is a bigger loss, even bigger than Tyreek Hill, is the loss of Eric Bieniemy. And I would be more cautionary against him if Andy Reid wasn't the coach. But because Andy Reid is the coach there, I don't really see this offense falling off because the offensive coordinator decided to leave for Washington for another offensive coordinator position, which doesn't make sense to me. Unless Ron Rivera is going to get kicked out the door and then he's going to be made the interim coach, you're still not the head coach.
I feel like that may have been the thought process in moving away from that too. Because I think maybe in Kansas City he just didn't see, maybe even the higher ups of Kansas City didn't see him being the heir to Andy Reid. That's all.
He was probably sitting there for 3 years just feeding Andy Reid like laced hamburgers with fat, just trying to have him get a heart attack. Like, let me coach Mahomes. Let me be the head coach. No, but like it's hard to make any kind of argument against Mahomes. He's just so talented and he brings out the best in players. I don't care who's around there. It's Justin Watson catching the ball, Kadarius Toney. It doesn't matter how young these players are, unless they're just straight up dropping every throw. Like, he's going to put the ball on the money and he's going to find new ways to get the ball. And they're going to throw the ball like 45 times a game.
Yeah,
so,
that's the biggest thing. That's going to go up big time.
And he still has Kels there. So even on the in-betweens, if he misses the big shot, they're going to move the chains with Kels. So it doesn't matter.
But here's my argument against the departure of your offensive coordinator with a guy like him. It almost is the same as Tom Brady, but you can even liken it to a starting pitcher going from one team to another in baseball. But when you got a guy that's that good, you think Roger Clemens, you think Nolan Ryan, you think these guys who are, arguably Hall of Fame guys that you sit there and they get into a new system and a new team, new pitching coaches, new coaching scheme, that it changes their game whatsoever. To me, Pat Mahomes and Tom Brady are two of these quarterbacks that you can talk to where your offensive mindset and the play calling shouldn't change their output. He runs that offense, Pat Mahomes does. He reads the defense, he runs the offense, he sees a play in front of him. He probably knows the whole playbook and could call the entire game if he really wanted to. Yeah, Ben-Ami is very smart, and Ben-Ami makes good decisions. I'm not saying that at all. But you look at Tom Brady going to another offense where there were, he had good weapons there. And all of a sudden he's, was it Leftwich that was there that was making the play calling?
In Tampa.
In Tampa? Yeah, Tampa.
Arians was, and then...
Well, Arians was the head coach, and then Leftwich was the offensive coordinator. But they can still do whatever they do, whoever's calling the plays. The only time I've seen it really affect a quarterback in the last couple of years, in my opinion, the biggest one was last year with Justin Herbert, where they just completely took the game out of his hands, and the play calling was so awful in terms of passing and in terms of downfield passing attack that it really did hinder. He still threw for 4,700 yards, but
also every year with Dallas.
Yeah, but you did. Well, that being said, is that Dallas or is that Dak? And I could argue it's Dak, but
Dallas. But then the Chargers just got Kellen Moore, so
Yeah, but anyway, back to Pat Mahomes. He's unanimous number one.
I'm going to kind of stop you really quick, just because I really don't agree with what you just said, because I don't think Mahomes is that kind of quarterback. I think play calling is not in his repertoire. I think he has been working within the offense. Like, he does a lot of things creatively, but he is not Peyton Manning. He is not Tom Brady. He is not making audibles on the field and calling the when you had Brady and you had Peyton in the league and Drew Brees, they were able to look at a defense and call their own plays for it. And they knew exactly what to do. Mahomes is not that. I think Mahomes is very much what this offense is they scheme up things on this and have fun doing it. He's a backyard football kind of player.
Well, that's what I was about to say, backyard football player.
More so than like I know what they're trying to run against me. And because we saw the first year in the league, he took the league by storm, and we did see some kind of decline in his play once teams started to make him have to read the defense. And then the play calling was just so good that they were able to overcome that. Like, you can argue, like, Andy Reid has done this for years in Philadelphia when he had McNabb, and he did this for, he had Jeff Garcia, over there still producing because Andy Reid is a good offensive coach.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really agree with that. He is this kind of guy that you lose your offensive coordinator. I would say if Andy Reid wasn't the head coach there, I'd be more worried about this departure. But because Andy Reid's the head coach there, and if Andy Reid starts calling the plays again instead of Bieniemy, then they're going to be just fine, and Mahomes is just going to be fine. But the departure of an offensive coordinator, especially that with a younger quarterback that really hasn't elevated his game to be able to be that field marshal.
That's where we differ. That's where I differ. I feel like he's more of a field marshal now than he was in his first 3 seasons. But the past 3 seasons, and that includes sitting behind Alex Smith that first season, but his past 3 seasons, I think he has been more of a general on that offense. Yes, I mean, I think the play calling has been 100% in favor because I think Bieniemy is a great quarterback. And some people always argue that, well, Bieniemy's only a great quarterback or a great offensive coordinator because he has Pat Mahomes. But I don't think that's the case. I think he's a good offensive coordinator. Pat Mahomes, I think, to me, has stepped it up. I think he has taken it to another level. I think he does read the defenses. He's not Peyton Manning. He's not Drew Brees. But like, look at someone like Aaron Rodgers, who does read a good defense, but he had a decline when they had a coaching change too as well with the offensive coordinator. But that's because they took the ball out of his hands. Similar situation, like I said, to Justin Herbert. Like, you got to let these guys play a little bit of backyard football, so to say, for them to be successful. It's not as to the point of Lamar Jackson, which is, severe backyard football. I mean, just, get the ball and do whatever you want. But I think at the end of the day, he's got the brain on him, and he's got the ability to make plays here. I think, there's a reason why he's the number 1 quarterback for both of us. But I just think I'm not afraid of the change in coordinator. And, the whole point of Andy Reid being there, regardless of that fact, like, there probably would be a decline in the whole team with the loss of Andy Reid, because that's a big morale loss. But I think Pat Mahomes is going to lead. You could put him on any team in the NFL, and he's going to lead that team and be a successful quarterback. Just, I think with the Kansas City Chiefs, they have a great thing going as a full-on locker room and team situation.
Well, I think post-snap, he's probably one of the best. He is the best quarterback in the league post-snap. Pre-snap, I don't know if he's there yet. Like, we just haven't seen enough of it because the offensive scheme has been so good. The kind of misdirection that they use, and that's still going to be there with Andy Reid. So this is why I'm not worried. Here's the
biggest thing too is the confidence, and he knows his receivers, and he knows his tight end, and he knows his running backs. And you just look at the sheer fact of that one playoff game, where Travis Kelce sits there and he's calling for the ball in the last second to get down the field to kick a field goal, and Kelce recognizes something in the defense based on the route he ran and goes right back to Mahomes. And Mahomes has the trust in his guys to get something done like that, especially in Kelce, that I think they just work together in a different way than some of these other guys are. He doesn't have the guys on his team sitting there barking for the ball consistently, because he knows that they don't know they're going to get the ball, and they know they're going to get themselves an opportunity, and he's going to give it to them. So
right.
We don't have to say anything more about Pat Mahomes. If you have anybody else above Pat Mahomes in your rankings, you got to reevaluate what you're doing when you wake up every morning. Because
also drop in the comment, place a little comment on the video to let us know why you think that. Why do you think that a quarterback is better than him?
Yeah. I mean, here looking at our at number 2 here, again, number 2 for both of us is across the board the same, and that's Josh Allen. Now, Josh Allen, to me, he's more of a two-way quarterback in terms of his rushing ability and his cannon of an arm. So he doesn't rely on just the passing. So in my opinion, and we'll get into this in a second, is that he has the opportunity to fall out of the number 2 as well. But also, I wouldn't say he has the ability to jump above Pat Mahomes at number 1, maybe in overall fantasy because of that rushing ability and rushing touchdowns. But because of that too, he has an opportunity with his arm, with the running game, for injury and to get himself out of that number 2 spot. But his talent is undeniable. But before we jump into him, let's take a quick break. When we get back, we'll be talking about Josh Allen, our number 2 quarterback in the rankings. All right, and we're back here. So we're on our number 2 quarterback for our top 5 fantasy rankings, and we're at Josh Allen. Let me know your thoughts on him and why you have him as your number 2, because I'm high on him. But like I said a little bit before we took the break, there's a chance he could slip out of this number 2 position in terms of overall fantasy finish.
Yeah, I mean, I have him as number 2 because I just think his running potential matched with his throwing potential is something like we haven't seen before. Yeah, Lamar Jackson is a better runner and has more yards. We know that, but he's not throwing for 4,500, yards in a season,
No.
and he doesn't have Stephon Diggs. This offense is solely around Josh Allen. The running backs aren't heavily involved. They don't get volume work. They don't get goal line touches. I mean, you look, he has last year had over 700 yards rushing, had 7 rushing touchdowns, had 35 passing touchdowns.
Mm-hmm.
His touchdown, and so his total touchdowns is up at 42. He had more. I mean, I actually don't know. I think Mahomes had some rushing touchdowns, but he's number 2 in total touchdowns in terms of quarterbacks. But passing yardage, it's there. It's a deep down the field passing offense. Now, I know there's a lot of knock on him and how he has some regression and how last year we saw the interceptions go up and the offense is not going to be as good as it was, but the offense is still good. He's still a big body mobile running quarterback, so he's not going to get hurt. Like, guy lowers his shoulders into people and runs people over.
Mm-hmm.
So I love him here. Like, if I don't get Mahomes, I'm not super excited with drafting like a high end quarterback. But he's definitely my number 2. Like, if he's off the board or if another guy goes in front of him and he's still sitting there and there starts to be a run, like, he's going to be a guy I like to grab. He can win you weeks.
Yeah. Well,
Simple
I
as
mean,
that.
over 550 attempts last year. It was almost 100 less attempts from the year before, but closer to his 2020 numbers. But when you look at it, like you said, the guy rushed for 700 yards the past 2 seasons. He's thrown for 4,200 yards or more the past 2 seasons. He's thrown for at least 35 touchdowns the past 3 seasons. He has thrown for 10 to 14 interceptions the past 3 seasons, but that comes with the volume too as well. So you got to understand that when his interception percentage was no higher than 2.5% in terms of his attempts. So that's pretty low. I mean, you don't want to see you get much higher than 2.5, but that's pretty low. I mean, when you look at people like Pat Mahomes, the elite one there, his interception percentage was 1.9, but the year before he had a 2.01. So to me, Josh Allen's right up there. His rushing ability is what separates him from Pat Mahomes. He did have second most touchdowns. I think he had 42 total touchdowns. Mahomes had 45 because he did have 4 rushing. And touchdowns matter. The passing volume is going to be tough to get himself over 500 yards if he's going to go for rush for 700. But if there ever is a change in that at any single point, and he goes for a little bit more passing from rushing, you are going to see a decrease in those numbers because of those 10 rushing yards equal 1 point versus 25 passing. But again, the only reason I see him dropping out of here is in decrease in his yardage for passing and his decrease in rushing. And really it was a decrease in rushing. And you get somebody like Lamar Jackson who comes in here and rushes for more, or somebody like Joe Burrow who throws for 5,000 yards in a season, if that were to happen. That's the only way I see him slipping out of number 2. Even Jalen Hurts, if he ups his passing yardage close to the 4,000 mark and keeps his rushing in that other mark and gets himself closer to what Allen was, that's the only one. But again, I think it's a small margin that's going to happen. I think Allen solidified himself as the number 2 for the past 3 seasons. Behind Mahomes, and I think he belongs there. I think there's no doubt in my mind that, hey, listen, if you're in the back end of the draft and you like Allen over Mahomes, you're not in a bad part to take him at that 2 swing early. I know it's not your favorite way of doing it, and if you watched our mock drafts earlier, I did that with Mahomes, take a quarterback early, and my team, I think, ended up being pretty sort of even across the board, had some good highlights and some big highs and not many lows. You do miss out on some of the big players, but you lock in. These 2 guys are the 2 quarterbacks that can get themselves massive points compared to the other guys.
Well, I think that there are 3 guys that have the potential to be in that number 2 spot behind Mahomes. And it's Allen, Hurts, who happens to be my number 3, and Lamar Jackson, who's not in my top 5. But those are the only three that have that ability, and that's because they all have high rushing upside.
Yeah.
Even Burrow and Herbert, they're going to have ridiculous seasons, and they have the weapons to do it.
I wouldn't say ridiculous. I wouldn't say ridiculous.
Well, they would. Well, all right. Well, let's look at their top end seasons versus the average season from Mahomes. I'm saying to get into that Mahomes category.
Well, here's the perfect example. So look at Mahomes in 2020. He had 4,700 yards, passing 38 touchdowns. Last year, Joe Burrow had 4,500 yards and 36 passing touchdowns and 12 interceptions. I think that year Mahomes only had 6 interceptions, which is insane to me too. But Jet put Joe Burrow as quarterback 3 in scoring last year with 429 points. There were only 4 quarterbacks that scored over 400 points in fantasy football last year. And that left Geno Smith in the 5 spot with 363. 422 was Jalen Hurts. That's a massive, that's a 60-point differential in quarterbacks, which is huge in my opinion. So that's the reason is Burrow at 429, Allen at 468, Mahomes at 498. And Hurts was at 422. When I say if Hurts got himself up over 1,000 yards and, got his passing touchdowns up
Hurts didn't play for the final 3 games of the season.
Exactly. But I'm saying like that to me, that's the argument I can make is Burrow or Hurts, one of those guys can, if there's a down year in Allen at all, like a little bit of down year where he only throws for 4,000 and he doesn't rush, he only rushes for, 450 or 500. Like one of these guys can get up. And it's the rushing part that I think will knock him down out of the 2nd spot. But you're right. There's not many people that you can put right behind Pat Mahomes comfortably. And like I just named the 4 guys that went over 400 points last year, and nobody else was within 60 points. Geno Smith was the closest. So let's move on to our number 3. If you feel different about Josh Allen, like we said about Mahomes, leave a note in the comments here and what your thoughts are and where you would have him. But when looking at our rankings, our number 3, we kind of differ. I've got Joe Burrow as my number 3. You've got as your number 4. You've got Hurts as your number 3. I've got him as my number 4. So they're neck and neck. Let's talk about Burrow first, and then we'll move on to Hurts. Sure. To me, I have Burrow. Burrow finished as number 3 last year in fantasy. The guy has gotten better year after year. He continues to throw around that 70% completion percentage, which is fantastic. His completions went up last year along with his attempts, but the yardage did change last year. He threw for 4,600 yards the year before. I think that in part was due to the injuries last year to Jamar Chase. I think with a healthy Jamar Chase, he could have got himself closer up to the 4,800 yards, with Chase getting another 400 yards under his belt. So that's my opinion. I think you see 34 and 35 consecutive touchdown seasons for Joe Burrow. I think he sticks with at least 35 this year. He gets up closer to the 5,000 mark, around 47, 4,800. And he only had 12 interceptions last year. I think the interceptions go down too as well, or stay around the same. You could see him getting up near that 450 point season, at 460 point season that Josh Allen had, just purely through the air. Now let's not knock the fact that he did rush for 259 yards, not like 370 he did the year before, but he did rush for a good amount of yardage, 257, and he had 5 touchdowns on the ground himself. So he is, coming off that ACL injury the year before. He only had 118 yards and 2 touchdowns, but he got more comfortable on the ground, just like he was at LSU with his rushing ability. I think he's going to still see 4 to 6 touchdowns on the ground, probably around 300 yards max there too as well. So I again, the rushing numbers aren't Josh Allen. That's why I don't see him above Josh Allen. But I think he is a prolific passer in the NFL.
Jalen Hurts is why I don't, and that's why I don't have him above Jalen Hurts. And
I agree with you. And I'll let you talk about Burrow and transition to Hurts.
I'll talk about Burrow first
in a second, but the reason I have Hurts underneath him is Hurts is somebody who I think has a regression and doesn't continue. And that's just my opinion on it. So tell me what your thoughts are on Burrow.
I agree with you in the rushing too, but I think the opposite's going to happen, where his passing is going to increase. Well, we'll talk about him in just a second. We'll finish up talking about Burrow. So Yeah, I mean Burrow is my number 4, and I haven't bought, that high because of what he can do, the weapons around him. That's a complete offense, right?
Hmm.
They have everyone around him. They have 3 really good receivers. They have a good tight end. They have a good running back. Their offensive line is getting better and better. Um, but he still gets sacked a lot. He still gets hit a lot. He's
Yeah.
the most sacked, or I think the top 3 most sacked quarterback in the last 3 seasons. Um, so he's going to get hit a lot, but they're going to throw the ball a lot. And they're in a division where they're going to have to kind of shoot out some points. And I think that might be overall the most competitive division in football. I think all 4 teams are going to be good. Um, that being said, I do think that there's going to be more game management. And the one knock on Joe Burrow I'll say is it's hard to put him in my 2-3 spot with only 300 yards rushing. And I get he has some rushing touchdowns with that and goal line rushing touchdowns. That's fine. And it's good to see, a non-mobile quarterback get those kind of rushing touchdowns. But when you have guys that can run for almost 1,000 yards at the quarterback position, like Jalen Hurts, it's really, really hard to put someone else in front of them. And I think the weapons are the same on the outside. So I think overall they're really equal with AJ Brown and Devonta Smith versus T Higgins and Jamar Chase. I think the Eagles have a better tight end, but
Burrow's got a better wide receiver 3.
yes. So I think that there's a lot of weapons around him. We like the offense. So if you like the offense, you like the quarterback for that offense.
Mm-hmm.
Burrow's an elite talent. He's an elite thrower. And you're right. He's improving every year. You saw the numbers that he threw up last year. He's going to be around that 4,500 yards passing. Again, I think, and unless he can break 40 touchdowns passing, I don't see him going into my top 3. Because I want total touchdowns there for my.
But here's the thing: total touchdowns last year for Jalen Hurts was only 35. Same number of passing touchdowns that Burrow threw last year.
He ran for over 800 yards.
No, he only ran for 700 and where's the rushing? 760 yards last year. So he had 13 rushing touchdowns, and that's where I see that's why I have him one step below. I'm not saying it's going to be a massive regression. I just don't see him getting 13 on the ground again. I'm not saying the yardage is going to go down. I think he'll still be in the 650, 700 range again, and maybe he'll cap 700 again. But
I think if it wasn't for Jalen Hurts getting hurt at the end of last year, Joe Burrow wouldn't have been in the top 3. He would have been number 4.
And
they're 20 points off.
Quite possibly so. We don't know that, but yeah, quite possibly so. It's that 2 game difference. That's a 1 game worth of points at least for Jalen Hurts, for him to tie that, and then 1 more game to beat it. I'm not saying that. That's why I have him neck and neck. I just have Burrow above him, and I just have Burrow above him because I just like the consistency, and I know the outcome, and I don't have to rely on legs and rushing yardage and injury concern from that one. Just because of what he does to the air. But Hurts is a talent nonetheless, and he's done it for 2 years in a row now. He's done for over 760 yards 2 years in a row rushing, double-digit touchdowns on the ground rushing each year, and his passing has gotten better, especially with the emergence of A.J. Brown to the team, increased himself not only in yardage but completion percentage by a whole 5 points, which is huge in passing. When you're talking about over almost 900 attempts, when you get your completion percentage up 5 points between those 2 years on 900 attempts overall, I think is huge. And that increases touchdowns by 6 in the passing game too as well. So yeah, he belongs right in that 3-4 range 100%. And I think the only reason
consideration too on what the Eagles were last year. I mean, like you saw
a juggernaut.
Like they would get up 3 scores early in the game and then run the ball down your throat and kill the game. Like how many times I had Jalen Hurts last year, and how many times did he have 20 points in the first half and then only score 5 or 6 points in the second half?
Yeah, it's true.
Because
it's true.
They would just coast out the games. And I don't think it's necessarily going to be that same thing this year. I think that they lost 2 safeties. So the top end coverage, the rest of the defense is still good. Like teams aren't going to be able to run the football on them. And we'll talk about in season, like sit your studs against the Eagles at running back, because they are a juggernaut there.
That's
But
all they've done was just find ways to stop the run.
yeah, but you can pick on them in the deep balls, and I think they're going to have to throw the ball a little bit more this year. I think Miles Sanders got 250 touches last year. I think they're going to manage carries for Swift and for Penny and for Jalen Hurts. I think his numbers are going to regress rushing, but I think his passing totals are going to go up. They're going to be
they should.
They're going to be in a lot more games, and you can't say you don't like the weapons around him. I mean, even adding DeAndre Swift, right? He's a great pass catcher out of the backfield. So adding that into the repertoire and the late season breakout of oh my God, why am I blanking on his name?
What position?
The running back.
Miles Sanders or Rashad Penny?
No.
Swift?
No. Oh my God.
Kenneth Walker? Or Kenny? Not Kenneth Walker.
Kenneth Gainwell.
Kenneth Gainwell.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it was a Kenny.
I am so sorry, guys.
It was a Kenny.
I just had a cup of coffee too, and that's embarrassing.
I need a coffee.
But yeah, I need it. Yeah, but even the late season emergence of Kenneth Gainwell, and we saw him being involved in the passing game a little bit more out of the backfield. I think that this offense is going to be more pass heavy, and we can see those numbers. Yeah, he didn't throw for a lot, but he was efficient when he threw the ball, and he was accurate downfield. We saw in the Super Bowl what he can do throwing the ball downfield.
Mm-hmm.
We know what kind of runner he is. We know he's going to get the rushing touchdowns. They scheme runs for him, so even if they don't give him the volume and running the football like they did last year, he's going to be able to take that if they give it to him. If the defense gives it to him, he's going to be able to break off a 20-30 yard run easily. I don't see his rushing numbers dipping down below 600 yards.
Okay.
So,
well, let's just say for talking sake, you say it goes around 600 yards. He's down to 160 let's say 16 points loss in the rushing, right? And you get that back 160 yards in the passing game, and just equivalent wise, it's only 3 points. Or sorry, is it 3 points? No, 4, 5, 6 points total. So it's a 10-point differential, and it just gets bigger of a gap in between there. And that's my only concern. Is like he may not need to run as much as he did last year. He may not need to, and if he doesn't need to, he's got to pick it up in the passing game for me really to see the pay dividends in where you're going to be taking a quarterback like this. Which is why I knocked him a spot. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I can understand that argument. He didn't throw for 4,000 yards. He was almost 300 yards away from that, and his passing touchdown totals was fairly low. He only threw for 22 touchdowns. I think that number goes up, though. I think that this offense, I think, is going to be a little bit more potent in the pass. We saw that he's efficient in passing the football. So I don't think it's a stretch to say he throws for 8 more touchdowns and gets to that 30 mark. And if he gets to that 30 mark on the touchdowns, then he's going to have, with his rushing ability and how they run him on the goal line, he's going to have at least 10 touchdowns rushing.
Yeah,
So
well, that's what you're drafting
touchdowns.
for. That's what you're drafting for. You're drafting for double-digit rushing touchdowns, and that's what it is. So if you see him increasing in the passing game, and you're getting the volume out of the rushing game you're going to, he can easily be right neck and neck with Josh Allen. There's no doubt about it. You just got to believe that he's ready to make that jump.
Really close.
He's going to make that jump. Close. Well, yeah, I mean, you're talking about 700 passing yards difference. I mean, that's huge. But again, like you said, Miles Sanders had a fantastic season last year. If that running game doesn't produce the way it's going to produce, someone's going to have to rush that ball, and they're going to have to start passing the ball. And so, yeah, you can see that value jump. I think he has the biggest, in terms of the top 5 guys, him and our next guy that we're both unanimous on have the biggest range of outcome. They have a high ceiling. Their floor is not low, but low for the top 5 is what I would say. And that's our number 5 that we're unanimous on is Justin Herbert, a guy who last year, to me, got shortchanged by an offensive coordinator and head coach, where you look at the year prior to, he throws for 5,000 yards and 38 touchdowns. How do you let a guy who's got an arm and a cannon, who's thrown for over 30 touchdowns 2 years in a row, at least 4,300 yards, and come into the next season, change your game up so much that he throws for 4,700 yards, which is a ton, but 25 touchdowns? Like, you dropped 13 touchdowns through the air from the previous year. You go from a 5.7 touchdown percentage to a 3.6, and his interceptions went down. Even though people knock him on his picks, it was 10 picks. But to me, I just find that so wild. And it wasn't like, I tried to break down the numbers more. Like, he had 256 first downs 2 years ago. He had 228 the previous year. It wasn't like it was a massive differential. You just saw a difference in, it looked like yards per attempt went down by almost a full yard. Air yards per attempt almost by a full yard. They just decided to dink and dunk, and they last year were the team that aggravated me the most, not only because I had him on my team, but to watch a guy who needs 6 yards for a first down and they're throwing the ball 3. You know, it's like that type of team last year where it's like they had the opportunities to push these games and win more games and really make themselves a formidable opponent in the NFL. Yet they found ways to just make themselves smaller in terms of playing the game.
Their playoff game is a perfect example of what their season was last year. Mm-hmm. Like, what they need is Robert Saleh as their head coach, all gas, no brakes. Like, you get a 27-point lead on someone, freaking crush them. Like, yeah. put your foot on the throat and finish the game. And that's what we saw a lot out of the Chargers, is that they would get a lead and not finish the game because their play calling would just switch up to being safe. And they're playing the game against the clock more than they're playing the game against the opponent. Put points on the board. And that hurts your fantasy stats. Now,
hurts your quarterback more than anything.
This is my knock on them. Like, I like Justin Herbert. I liked what he's done, but they get Kellen Moore, who we've said the same thing about the offensive struggles in Dallas for a couple of years now, as Kellen Moore is the offensive coordinator there. And now they get Kellen Moore as your coach. I don't know if things are going to change too much. I still value him just because of potential and what the team is. Like, your number 1 running back is the best pass catching running back in the NFL. You have 3 legit wide receivers that 2 of them are big, tall, and deep route receivers with Mike Williams and Quentin Johnson. Mm-hmm. And then Keenan Allen is the ultimate possession receiver. And then Gerald Everett at tight end. They have all the weapons in the world to be successful. Yeah, Herbert should be throwing for 50 touchdowns every year with this kind of.
He's got the potential to do it.
The problem is too that, like, their receivers haven't stayed healthy.
Yeah,
like, they haven't had a full season in like 3 years where they haven't had receivers out for multiple weeks. You saw Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Donald Parham, like, everyone went down last year. And so Keenan Allen's throwing to.
You mean Herbert's throwing to?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Justin Herbert. Man, I'm brain farting today.
Justin Herbert's throwing to Carter and Everett like crazy, and, like, you know, pretty much guys who are afterthoughts. I agree with you.
So, you know, if the receivers stay healthy, I mean, that's the whole reason they go on and draft Quentin Johnson, is because, like, their top end receivers can't stay healthy. So you get a guy that's 6'3" and 225 that runs a 4.5 40. That's Mike Williams. That's a replica of Mike Williams. So just throw him in there and he'll be able to catch the deep ball for you.
But here's my whole thing about the Kellen Moore, though, is if you look at Dak Prescott's 2 full seasons from 2019 to last year, it was 2019 and 2021. I can't remember when Kellen Moore came into that offense after what's his name left. But 2019, Dak Prescott threw for almost 600 attempts, 4,900 yards, 30 touchdowns. Okay. 2021, 596 attempts, 4,500 yards, 37 touchdowns. Like, he had 2 great seasons, and that was with Zeke, still getting double-digit touchdowns, and he was probably 1,000 yards in 2019. I got to look back at the stats there. But they had a good running game, good offensive line. The offensive line is beefed up in L.A., and on top of that, you can argue that LA's receiving core is better than Dallas's full receiver core in any of the past 5 years, any of the years that Dak was there, to be honest with you. Because the sheer fact is you've got 3 wide receivers right off the bat that are studs. You got a great receiving running back out the backfield and solid tight ends. Like, yeah, that may be the only thing that Dallas had better.
I'd maybe argue that when Dak had Cooper and CeeDee Lamb's rookie year and Michael Gallup and Dalton Schultz.
It's close, but what I'm saying is Kellen Moore is not working with nothing here. Kellen Moore didn't value the pass. It wasn't like he valued only the run game there. Like, he knew what he had in the offense, and the fact that he was able to produce like almost 600 attempts in 2 of those seasons with Dak Prescott. To me, Justin Herbert is a better quarterback than Dak Prescott, just naturally talented in the passing game. So I just think, to me, that's why I'm going to say it now. I'll let you continue on Herbert, but Herbert is my dart throw, my bold take for the season that he finishes MVP in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, what I was going to say about my comparison for the coaching change was that Kellen Moore will just that offense found ways to lose games, and it's not much different than what they had last season. So yeah, offensive numbers should go up. It's why I have him as my number 5. I think he has all the potential in the world and the people around him to throw for 50 touchdowns, to throw for 5,000 yards. He has that potential. He has that ability, and he has the talent around him to do that. It's going to be and listen, they're going to have to be in shootouts with Kansas City. They're going to have 2 teams in their division. I mean, listen, Denver's defense is actually really good. And so I don't know if he's going to have huge passing games. So even though the team might not be good, like, Denver's defense is very good. But the Raiders, I mean, they're Swiss cheese back there, and you just throw wherever you want. But yeah, that's why I have him there, is that he has potential and have the people around him to be a top 5 quarterback. And I think that there are guys around the next kind of grouping of quarterbacks. The guys right after the 6, 7, 8 guys that I have, all have the potential to be in the number 5 too, but they just don't have the weapons around him that Herbert does.
Yeah.
And I think just for that alone is why he's my number 5.
Well, and here's the thing is if you gave Herbert 10 more touchdowns, and put him up to 35, which I think is very reasonable. I mean, the fact that Joe Burrow can get 36, Herbert should be able to get 36. But you put him at 35 last year. That would have put him literally up at quarterback 5 on the season. Just no additional yardage, no additional rushing yardage, no additional rushing touchdowns, just 10 touchdowns to his passing game, which is very feasible for him to do. And on par with Joe Burrow, I think he puts himself at the top 5. And like you said, the growth is going to be there. There's a pathway to see 5,050. There's a path to that. Yeah. And the biggest thing for me, the path to that, is the fact that you have one of the best receiving running backs in the NFL on top of that. And they treated that completely differently too as well than they did years prior. And I just see a huge jump, because if they're going to win, like you said, they need to keep the foot on the throat and not take their foot off the gas here. Because if they do that, then you're going to see games where, like, Justin Herbert has a chance to, if I go to his game logs here, chance to throw multiple games over the 400-yard mark consistently, because of just the fact that, especially against Kansas City, but some of the other teams they play, they're not going to, get up 21-0 and all of a sudden start to coast. I mean, last year he had zero.
Las Vegas Swiss cheeses.
Yeah, he had 0 games over 400 yards last year. 0. And there were games where he had like 200 plus at the half easily, and they just coasted.
Let's not forget he was injured last year.
I agree. Like, the rib injury did hinder some stuff,
and a lot of the play calling could have been to try to protect him. They had leads in games, and they're just trying to protect him. They kind of played this dink and dunk
But I think that affected more of his rushing than anything, because his rushing numbers were cut in half, and he had none inside the red zone. That's for sure.
And again, you look at Keenan Allen and Mike Williams and how that hurt him last year, and that's the big play touchdown ability. There was a lot of plays, and I remember watching last year where they had drop balls that were, that they had the shot, bombs the ball 50 yards, and the receiver just drops it, and they're in tight coverage, but Mike Williams might make that catch. Keenan Allen might make that catch.
He'll be open, make that catch. I agree. When they came back after injuries, they did show that big play ability. It just, I don't know. I just think the potential's there. You agree with me. I agree with him. He's number 5 in our books for a reason, outside of Lamar Jackson, and the other guys that are on this.
Number 5 in our books and number 5 in our hearts.
What's crazy, some people have Justin Fields up above him and Lamar Jackson way above him. And I just think those 2 quarterbacks alone, they have the rushing potentials that this guy doesn't have. It's just the volatility.
Those guys are in my next 3.
Yeah, but just the volatility in those guys can be so big, but it can be such a big drop-off if they don't give you what you need on the ground. Where Herbert himself never relies on the ground game, which hinders his game. However, if he gets back up to the 250, he can. The 250, 300 yards for the season, which is low for these rushing quarterbacks. But if he can do that and put 3 or 4 rushing touchdowns under his belt too, that even pads his stats even more. So, that's our top 5 here. We're going to take a quick break before we jump into the tight ends. Again, if you have any thoughts on our top 5 quarterbacks, put a drop in the comments. Let me know what you think.